examples, such as the abortion issue, again. And so you had Roe versus Wade. This is 1973. Within the same month, you had Doe versus Bolton. And Doe versus Bolton said that it's perfectly permissible and in keeping with Roe versus Wade to make abortion the law of the land on the basis of the health of the mother. And when they said the health of the mother, they didn't mean the immediate health, like somehow the person in the operating room has to make the decision, do we save the mother, do we save the child, this most difficult decision. But by health it just meant whether economically, the family wouldn't have enough money if they raised a kid, or her physical appearance, so she didn't want another child, or any type of sociological reasons, anything but the physical health of the mother. Those types of things have no factor in determining the moral value. They may be circumstances that have to be dealt with, but these are mutually exclusive to the moral appropriateness or inappropriateness of the sanctity of human life, right? So, you can see this if you step back and think for a moment, because what happens in a lot of moral decisions is that emotion begins to take over. There's a certain emotional factor in this that begins to take over, and people then will make their assignment of moral appropriateness or prohibitiveness, what's right or what's wrong, based on their emotional response to it, rather than stepping back and saying, yes, there are certain factors that we must address, but those factors are not going to be determinant in what is right or what is wrong. So this will be clear in a second, but let's just say that our freedom and rationality necessarily closely linked. Freedom and rationality. I'd say yes. So to reason without any corresponding freedom to act nullifies duty and responsibility. You can't hold me responsible for something that I am not free to do. So we're not programmed. We're free moral agents. We are not programmed and morally determined, except in the Christian worldview, when we come to understand that because of Adam's sin, then death passed upon us, through the human race, but also the culpability, the very objective guilt of sin. We became these morally, fatally flawed, morally guilty, morally polluted people. So hence this fallen, sinful nature. And if you don't agree with that, let's say you are not a believer, but I assume that wouldn't be those in this class, but if you're not a believer, then I would say if you have this high view of human nature that we're all just basically good, then what do you suppose would happen if we did away with all laws? Let's say we're all basically good, then we're all basically morally self-regulating. Let's just do away with all laws. And we do away with all laws, are you going to feel safe in your house at night? And for people that think that people are all basically good, people are just basically good. Okay. Do you have locks on your house? We sell more security stuff. In this building, we've got cameras, around. We have people that are employed in doing security. They've built a fence around, the White House. Really, what are we doing then if people are basically good? So the idea that we're free moral agents means that we can act appropriately, we can act violently, if we prefer. Now, another question, should ethics really be a priori? Just consider that this is something that is embedded in us. It's intrinsic. It inheres to us. It's something that is not part of the circumstances to be dealt with. We don't base it on our experiences. So we might learn about morals through experience, shouldn't we? Kant pushes back on this. He says, well, yes, we might learn something, but still what is it that you would have us to learn unless it become individuated and relative? And we all learn separate things. There must be a binding constant, a standard to which all of that which is obligatory and duty on our part is directed. So let's talk about strengths and weaknesses of Kant and deontology. So some strengths: that Kant's distinction between duty and inclination seems sound. What is right is not always what we want. But that certainly makes sense and resonates with us, even as Christians. Now, second thing, justice, second strength. Justice for Kant would always be safeguarded for individuals who are always end in themselves. He avoids the utilitarian flaw of allowing the minority to suffer for the benefit of the majority. And when we look at Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, utilitarian theory, it's basically the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. But who determines that? It just seems, though, that we would have no, what would civil rights movement have been? What would slavery have been if we were to try to determine what's the greatest good for the greatest amount of people? People would say, well, I'm benefited from owning slaves. I benefit from not giving certain minorities the civil rights that everybody else has. There seems to be moral progress when the opposite takes place, when we regard that people have intrinsic value, that they are ends in themselves. So this seems to be another one for Kant. Kant's appeal to reason, another strength. Kant's appeal to reason and universal values is sane and constructive. Certainly, it's reasonable. Surely it's best if we give grounds for our ethics and share those values with others. So we have been, as we said, the Declaration of Independence, the preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, gender inclusive, all people are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with such unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's a priori, by the way, a priori. It's self-evident. We do not need any additional evidence. What evidence would we require to say that all are created equal? We say, no, this is part of who we are. We are intrinsically endowed with such value so as to be self-evident. So one critique, and I'll just give a critique by Peter Singer, and he says Kant's deontological ethics have recently been criticized by Singer. Singer criticizes Kant for removing the element of sympathy and emotion, as we referred to a moment ago. I will do what's right by factoring in the emotional impact or be sympathetic towards what could potentially be the fate of others. But this is not to say that sympathy has no place, or sympathy or empathy have no place in our moral spectrum, but not in determining what is right or what is wrong. I mean, imagine what a mess it would be if we brought sympathy or empathy into the whole situation as a determining factor. Then what we have is a situation where, okay, so there are some fixed moral values, but we'd have to say with those fixed moral values that there are now exceptions, except when this. I think if you bring sympathy or empathy into it as a way of determining what's right or wrong, you're going to have more exceptions than rules. The standards will be only the rule from which the exceptions are made. So what good's the standard? You'll have the standard that you should be truthful and honest. What will except when the truth this, or when the truth causes this outcome or this consequence, or when someone is going to have experience something that would cause some emotional or life-disrupting circumstance. And it might sound harsh, cruel, cold, almost like Dr. Spock, and just act with reason, which is what Kant has been accused of, just acting with reason, not taking into account. The problem with the moral universe is that some things that will be done, that are appropriate, will be done at a cost. It'll be done at a personal cost to yourself, and it'll also be done at a cost to others. I can remember a devotional by Oswald Chambers, and he was talking about those called into the ministry, and they will say, well, I would accept God's call into the ministry, except what it'll cost others. Like if I accept God's call and God says, takes me to a foreign land someplace, what about my parents and those at home? Remember Jesus in Luke chapter 9. Let me bury my father first, and then he says, let the dead bury the dead, but you come and follow me. We get that. We do get that there's going to be a cost to following Jesus. There's going to be a cost to answering God's call vocationally, upon our life, but also morally upon our life. But we don't allow the cost then to determine what our decisions will be. We make a decision in the moral universe because of something that God has said is appropriate or something that is to be prohibited. If we do it on the basis of what it's going to cost somebody else, or the impact on our life, or the impact on someone else, we only see this in the short run. We only see this in the pinprick of what is our life. We don't see this in terms of maybe God has factored in that cost to produce a particular outcome, but for that cost, that outcome wouldn't happen. And I understand the sovereignty of God, but I'm saying you really can trust the fact that the Word of God, the Spirit of God, these are sufficient means to determine the obligation that rests upon us to be duty bound. I'm not buying into everything that is deontological ethics and what Kant teaches, but I'm just saying that all of these ethical systems are asking the question: how do you determine the moral worth of that act or that act? How do you make those kinds of judgments? Virtue ethics says it's based on what will produce character. So I want this enduring, lasting character by habituating these types of morally permissible actions and attitudes. And deontological ethics says I want it. I'm going to determine this not based on myself, or not based upon the extrinsic worth of other people, or not based upon the circumstances, not based upon subjectivity or empathy or emotions, things of that nature, but because this particular act is right as I see it to be replicated in the life of everyone else. I would love to see this universalized in all people. This is the one that's a little bit more difficult to understand about the categorical imperative, but it's not saying I wish everybody would act the same way as I am going to do right now because I think everybody would achieve what's best in their own self-interest. And this is not what he's saying at all, because what is right or what is wrong could be against self-interest. And again, think about it. If it's in my best self-interest and not what is morally right or morally wrong, then I am saying my self-interests are tied to something extrinsic. It is something I gain. I gain popularity with you. I gain a better job. I gain more money. I gain status. I gain. When the Apostle Paul in Philippians 3 talked about what he lost, what he jettisoned, what he lost, that he might win Christ, that he might gain Christ. He used that analogy. This is our ultimate objective, to walk in lockstep with the Lord Jesus, which could come, and does come at a great cost. Lord bless you.